Let's take a closer look at DTDs. Now, using a DTD schema, and DTD stands for Document Type Definition, is one of kind of the standard practices out there in XML, but it's one of those things that is changing, and we'll talk about why a little later. First of all, this is one of the big reasons it's changing. A document type definition that's used to validate XML is not XML based. And if you'll notice here, I've put on the screen a little example that we're going to play with in just a few minutes of just a very simple document type definition. Now, when these first came out, when the W3C first began to suggest that these be used in XML, it was okay because the document type definitions have been around a long time. They actually precede HTML. They go back to the HTML days. But as people began to use them, they began to complain. Wait a minute, we're writing our documents in XML, and that was a big leap for us coming off HTML because it had to be well formed and so forth. Then we got into these DTDs, different syntax, different all kinds of stuff, and people started complaining. The W3C went back and rethought the schema world and provided XML based, and we'll talk about those later. But you do need to understand that for right now, document type definitions are the de facto standard out there. A lot of people are still using them. Now, again, these came from the SGML days. They've been around a long time. The people who like them will fight and die for them. So that's another one of those little oddities about the XML world you just need to be aware of. Now, what exactly does a DTD do? Well, bottom line, it defines the XML document structure. This can either be inline or a separate document. Now, by inline, let me draw you a little picture and I'll show you an example in a little while. Let's say that I've got a bunch of XML data in this particular document. So I've got all my XML here. Well, I can include the DTD up here in a separate section in the same document. Maybe times you need to do that. What you'll see most of the time, however, is here's your XML document. This is the way you tend to normally think of these whole validation process. And here's your DTD as a separate file. And this would be called an external or a separate document. And you use that to validate your XML. So it can be either way. Now, the DTD is going to determine what elements can or must appear. Now notice the differentiation there. Elements that can appear, meaning they're optional, they don't have to be there, and those that must absolutely have to be there. Now, without satisfying the DTD, your document is not going to be reported as valid. We can also determine what order the elements have to be in. We'll look at that in some examples in a few minutes. Then, we can also limit or talk about somewhat the data that they must contain. Then we can set attribute information and requirements. So again, we talk about attributes on the individual tags. We can control or require those in the DTD. Now, here's one thing you need to watch. What does a DTD not determine? And notice these. First of all, it doesn't determine what the root element is. It does not determine the instances, the number of instances of elements, and you'll see this later on. And it does not determine the data types for the data that's included in the document. And here's the big one, does not provide the semantic meaning of an element. By that I mean it can't determine or restrict whether data is a name or a date or so forth. Now, DTDs does give us a couple of functionalities that are still really cool, and we'll talk about those in the next 3 or 4 videos.